Hi everyone, my name is Eileen and I'll be introducing Sean Foote today. So I really wanted to introduce him today because I'm really inspired by his efforts in entrepreneurship and impact investing in social good. So how many of you guys are interested in fintech, data science, or AI? Oh, that's great, because these are really important skills in venture capital investing, and these are also fields that Sean really excels at. So for a little bit of background, Sean is a co-founder and managing director of an early-stage firm called Co-Creation Capital and a mid-stage firm called Cosmopolitan Capital. He's invested in companies such as Hotmail, Pandora, and also RocketFuel. He's also had background as a consulting at Boston Consulting Group and an engineer at AT&T researching AI. He's also taught VC and private equity at Haas and also impact investing at Stanford. So I'd just like to introduce Sean.
Let's hear it for Eileen, yeah? Great. Wow. I'm going to attempt to sit in this chair. It's going to last for about 10 seconds, I think.
Looking like that, I hope the chair is...
It works. It works. Thanks for the introduction. You know, I'm going to talk about Co-Creation Capital, my background, and I'm going to talk about Cosmopolitan Capital. I could say something about it now, which is it's an example of how to fail. That didn't work out. So these are my slides. It's really great to be here. So I looked at the list of people who have spoken here before, and the hurdle's set pretty high. So we'll see how I do. And in addition, I was walking over from where I parked the car up near Haas, and it's a beautiful night. And so I stand between you. It's like, why are you here? It's like, I really have to perform because the weather is really, really lovely today. So I am starting with this picture, and it's an important picture, and there's a meaning to it and a lesson, and I'm not going to tell you what the lesson is yet, because I don't want you to immediately head out and enjoy the evening. So a little bit about me. I grew up in a small town in the middle of Missouri, and I am the little guy on the left of this picture, and that's my grandfather. I wanted to start with my grandfather because my grandfather is the person that I hope to become someday, and I keep working at it. He's an incredibly solid, devoted, loving, stern, amazing person. Our whole family still talks about him. Happens that today, totally coincidentally, today would have been his 101st birthday. So I told my mother that I was starting off with this slide, and she was overjoyed. Now, you heard my background, but I want to talk a little bit about why and how some of that background happened. So I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I need to see this a little better. I told you that the chair would last for about 2 seconds, and now the camera is going to have to follow. I'll wait. Okay, there. Okay, now what if I do this? Yeah, it's a widescreen. If I sit here, you close up on me. This is it's so much fun though. Okay, so I was an electrical engineering undergrad with a minor in computer science and physics. I'm not actually sure why I became an electrical engineer. In part it was because when I told my classmates in high school that I was going to do it, they were like, wow, that sounds really hard. I was like, okay, great, then I'm going to do it. And I think part of the sense of that, and part of the reason why you're here may be like the joy of the craft, the joy of the content, but part of it also is that it's really hard. And there's a lesson there for that, which is if you do stuff that not a lot of other people can do or want to do, then that's like the first step towards success. You've already taken, you know, the however many, 8 billion people that we have, and you've narrowed it down to the smaller subset that can do hard things. So that's what I did. I had no idea what I really wanted to do coming out of school. I had a great time at school. I was the student body president. I was in a fraternity. The fraternities at my campus, the University of Missouri Rolla, right? So it was an entirely engineering campus. So fraternities had study hours. Like the reason why I joined a fraternity was because I had to be in my seat at my desk from 7 to 11 every night. And that was my experience of education. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I did 3 interviews. I only remember 2 of them. One was IBM, and the other one was AT&T Bell Labs. So I went to AT&T Bell Labs, and again, in part just because at the time, they were the holder of more patents than any other company in the United States. AT&T Bell Labs is the research arm of the telephone company at the time. And so I went there. I worked on artificial intelligence systems for testing the telephone network. And I was in a group of 20 people. There were 12 PhDs. There were 7 master's degree holders and me as an undergraduate. And I could see very clearly what my history would be and what I was working with a woman who had come out of retirement. She was doing the same sort of job I was doing. She was 70 years old. She was brilliant. She was fantastic. But I could see that and where I was going to head, and that sounded really boring. And I had an office mate who spoke a language that I did not understand at all, and it was the language of business. He was the one business person in the group of 20. And I was like, hey, that sounds kind of cool. So I went to business school. And that business school was the Darden School. That's why we listened to the Dave Matthews Band. I was there, worked for 2 years. The Darden School, the important thing to know about the Darden School, tests on Saturdays. So I did that for 2 years. And then when it came time to get out, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I really had 2 options in front of me. One was to continue academically and to get a PhD in economics at Chicago and become a professor. And the other one was to go to work as a consultant at Boston Consulting Group. And it was a really tough decision because this was really the first time that my life was really forking in a major way. And I needed something to help me decide what to do in that circumstance. And I made a decision that you guys may be faced with, and you may come to the same decision as well, which is I decided to do the thing that opened more doors than it closed. So a PhD is super cool and interesting. Anybody want to get a PhD at some point? Right? Yeah, right, yeah. So you guys are way smarter than I am, and go do that. I maybe wasn't quite smart enough to do that. But it does point you down a pretty particular path. And consulting is really quite opening. I mean, so I went to Boston Consulting Group, and I was a consultant for 5 years. And that's like a postgraduate education in business. It's like, I know more about, I know a lot about stuff that doesn't matter at all. I know more about the telephone book. I know more about the yellow pages than anybody has a right to know. I can tell you which categories of the yellow pages were the most expensive. And like now we don't even know what yellow pages are. But it's relevant because if you're advertising online, it does start to matter how you think about different categories and the way in which people advertise online. So it ended up being a helpful experience. When I was at BCG, I made a decision. Actually, I was working with a utility company who was structuring a venture capital firm, and I decided to get in the venture capital business in 1998. And I did one other thing, which is I started teaching. I started at Virginia, and then I did some one-off teaching at Harvard and Michigan and University of Pennsylvania. And then I started teaching at the business school at Berkeley. And so what I was able to do basically was I had that fork in the road, and I decided to do the thing that opened the most doors. And it turned out that one of the doors that it opened was the thing that I wanted to do to begin with, which was teach. So I am a full-time venture capitalist and spare time teacher. And I have 2 firms, not quite the same 2 as we're on the thing, Co-Creation Capital and Transform Capital. And I want to talk about those a little bit just so that you get a sense. But I'm talking a lot, and you guys are being totally attentive. I should make clear, so I teach for a living, or teach for my spare living, and raise your hand and ask questions. And if we can't get a microphone to you, I can repeat the question, and then we can do it that way because it's way more fun that way. Otherwise, I'm going to talk nonstop for 20 minutes. I'm going to feel like you guys would rather be outside where the weather's so nice. You have a question, yes? Oh, no, I can repeat the question. Well, it's right there now. You might as well take it.
I'm taking it right
Yeah. Okay, there we go. We'll do one or the other. Go for it.
What attracted you to venture capital? Because that's not necessarily like a very common path that people take out of consulting, I imagine.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what attracted me to venture capital? Well, there is really no common way to get into venture capital. There are people who are journalists who had very successful careers in venture capital. There's plenty of people who are technologists who become venture capital or entrepreneurs who become venture capital. My exposure to it was when I did this consulting study on structuring a venture capital firm. I'd never heard of it before. I told my mom I was going to be a banker because nobody knew what venture capital was. I mean, look at my hairline, right? It was a long time ago. And to me, it looked like consulting without the clients and without the travel. Like when you're a consultant, you sell your time. And if you're selling your time, that means every once in a while you get a call at 11 o'clock at night and says, I need something by 8 o'clock in the morning, and you've got to do it because you're selling time. And I was like, hey, venture capital sounds great. It's like people come, you've got the money, they come to you. Like they come and sit in my conference room. I don't go to their conference room. I mean, so it had the diversity of consulting. And at BCG, you would work on 2 cases at the same time when I was there, not anymore. And venture capital has that same diversity, the same intellectual, well, actually not quite the same intellectual vigor as consulting. BCG consultants, like the best people I have ever sat with in a room, aside from a few rare moments, were just sitting in the typical case room with Boston Consulting Group clients, or I'm sorry, Boston Consulting Group consultants. So venture capital doesn't quite have that level of intellectual horsepower and challenge, but it had the diversity, and that's what did it. Other questions? That was really fun. Oh, okay, we'll go back there. Yes, ma'am.
At what point did you decide, or what made you leave BCG to go on and pursue VC?
I couldn't buy milk. That was the big reason, really. At BCG, I would wake up on a Monday morning and I would get on an airplane, I'd go somewhere for 4 or 5 days, and then I would come back and I'd say, oh, I need milk for my cereal. So on the way from the airport, I would pick up a quart of milk, I'd put it in my refrigerator, I'd use it, and then I'd get on a plane again on Monday, and then I'd come back and the milk was spoiled and I have to go buy milk again. I didn't really like that life, and I really like my cereal. Let's see, what else do I have on the, oh, okay, so I want to talk, so my task here is to, I mean, really what I'm trying to do is give you my advice, but my advice in a very narrow way. I mean, I can talk, I'm a venture capitalist. I can give my advice with absolutely like no data or experience or even opinion, but I can still give you my advice. But my goal here is to give you my advice from the perspective of somebody who has been a technologist and a venture capitalist. And so it's not really my job to explain venture capital to you, but I need to explain parts of it in order to give you my advice. So here's the first thing that...
Would you take one more question
course.
before you explain?
Yes.
So the question that I want...
Thank you.
Which one do you put first, milk or cereal?
Cereal. Okay. Here's what venture capitalists do, right? We go out and we find deals that we might want to look at, and then we do due diligence, which is we do research. We try to understand the risk profile and the reward profile of that company to decide whether we want to make an investment, and then we make that investment. The process of making an investment is actually quite short. This overall process through to investment can be, anywhere from a couple of weeks to 6 months, but the actual investment process is quite short, like a month or less. And then we help the company after we make an investment, which is something you can't do in the public markets. You buy a stock. It's not like Cisco calls you up and asks your opinion on their next router. But we do that all the time. So we try to help, and then there's an exit. And that's basically all we do. That's the fundamental knowledge that you need to know. Now, except there's one thing missing. Any guesses? Shout it out, buddy. Yes, right? So if you don't have money, you can't be a venture capitalist. In fact, as a side note, what is the #1 goal of a venture capitalist? Exactly. Oh, you guys are better than my business school students. I like this a lot. We're gonna have fun. So yes, raise another round of capital. Because that's the motive, we therefore perform. We have to raise a good fund. It has to be interesting and exciting in order to raise another fund, right? So we build the portfolio specifically to raise another fund. So we have to fundraise, which brings me to quite possibly, way too early in this conversation, the single most important thing that I can tell you as advice. It's the single most, now side note, I'm gonna say about 3 times that I'm about to tell you the single most important thing, but this is the single most important thing so far, which is, the one skill that I really think we all need is sales. So the thing, when I got into the venture business, I got into it as I answered the question. I got into it because there's diversity of thought and these cool technical gadgets. I get to go meet with people, come to my office. They're so interesting. And then we make the investments. Then we try to help. I work really hard at that. And that is actually not the best skill to have. The best skill to have is sales. I actually don't care what job you're going to end up in. It's sales. For me, I have to sell myself and my fund to potential investors so that I can continue to be a VC. Then I have to sell myself and my fund to potential entrepreneurs who are going to help my fund be more successful. And then once I'm investing in the company, I have to, let's say, sell the board on an idea I have, or sell the company to other people that the company wants to hire. Those are all part. My whole job is really sales. Your job, I don't even know where you're going to be, but I can guarantee you that a huge percentage of your job is going to be sales. If you are a fundamental if you are a coder at Facebook, you are going to have components of your job which is sales, because people are going to look at your code and say, I don't understand why you did it this way. And you're going to have to convince them that the way you did it is right. That's a sales job. In addition, you have to know who your customer is, because the art of the sale isn't, I've got this, in this example, I've got this crappy car, I've got to figure out how to sell somebody. Really, you are trying to sell the thing that you have to somebody that needs it. And so you have to understand what their needs are. The process of sales makes you a better technologist, it makes you a better employee or employer, and it makes you a better spouse. Yeah, right. Yeah, you just said what? Yeah. If you didn't hear that, he said what? Yeah, basically I have all these things where it all comes down to the best way to be a husband or a wife or a spouse or a significant other. And this is one way. You have to always, if you are married and you are not selling your spouse, if you're no longer dating your spouse, then you're going to lose. Okay, so that was the first single most important thing. So the other thing about the venture business is there's different funds compete in different ways on this thing, right? So for example, Google Ventures knows way more about the cloud and the cost of cloud and advertising technology than I will ever know, because they know it from the inside. They're living it. They can outcompete me on deciding whether a deal is the right deal to do. Andreessen Horowitz, Scott Cooper was here like last week or something like that, right? Okay, last year, same thing. Well, it's only like 6 weeks ago that it was last year. Okay. Scott was here a while ago, and he runs Andreessen Horowitz's group that helps people. There's 120 people that he works with, and they work with their portfolio to try to make those companies better. Everybody competes in one of these ways. They don't necessarily say it, but they do. So I have to lay that out because I want to tell you briefly about my two funds. One of them is called Co-Creation Capital, and it competes the same way Andreessen Horowitz does, except they have 120 people and we have 3. So the notion there is that basically what we're saying, what Andreessen Horowitz and we are saying is, we're no better at finding deals. We're frankly no better at doing due diligence on deals, but we are definitely better at helping them afterwards. I invest in a company and then I join the company. I'm the head of data science for one of our portfolio companies because that's what we do. So I think that's pretty cool. We figured out how to compete. And I guess there's another lesson here, which is whether you know it or not, you're always trying to figure out the way in which you can compete. And so when you're out looking for jobs, how do you compare versus the other people that are looking for jobs? What is it that makes you interesting and unique? So there's always a competition there. I have a second fund called Transform Capital, and it competes in this area of invest. So I have one page which is an advertisement for Transform Capital. It's the only page where I'm really going to talk so much about what I'm doing. But it gives you an example of how to structure something in order to compete in a certain industry. So it's a later stage fund, right? And we're greedy venture capitalists, right? But my partner and I are donating our personal profits to universities, including, as of like last week or 10 days ago, including Berkeley. So we're just launching this effort in Berkeley. We started at the University of Virginia, where we both went to school, and now we're bringing it to Berkeley. So hey, that's great. We're gonna donate millions of dollars to your future alma mater, which is awesome. And great, that's fantastic. But one of the reasons why we're doing it is because it helps us compete. You need one piece of data. It's really hard to get into late stage deals. So if you have that one piece of data, then you know how this thing competes. For every, some of you are going to go out, who wants to start a company? Yeah, right, excellent. Thank you, I will continue to be in business. Some portion of you are going to start a business and it is going to become a later stage company eventually, and it's going to raise like $20, $30 million. And I'm going to come to you and say, hey, can you let me in your fund? I know you're raising $20 million. You've got $80 million of demand for your thing, but let me in. And the reason isn't because 10 years ago I spoke to you in front of a class. The reason is because I am donating money to your alma mater, right? And that's how we get in, and it works. And so we get advantage by getting into companies. And so that's how we're thinking through how to compete. It's not affiliated with the school. This is also the other really important thing, the most important thing that I can say, which is make it matter, right? I am obviously not doing transform capital to get rich because I'm giving stuff away. I'm doing it because it's cool. And when I was sitting in your seats, I had no idea. I mean, I gave you my background. I have no idea what I wanted to do. I'm still not sure I know what I want to do. And so in addition to this thing where, I wanted to make sure that I was opening more doors than I was closing as I went forward, the other thing is I wanted whatever it was I was doing to be something that I was proud of, something that I felt like was worthy, that I could tell my mom or my grandfather that this is what I'm doing, and I hope it's okay. And so I never ran around. I mean, it used to drive me crazy. You'd read the book that would say something like, discover your purpose or follow your passion. I was like, I don't really know what my passion is. It's like, that's not a great guiding principle for me to say I should follow my passion. I have lots of passions, and sometimes I have no passions. I don't know what to do. So what I do is whenever I'm trying to decide things to do, it's like, does it matter? And I've done things that matter that didn't make it, and I've done things that made it that didn't matter, and of the two, I would far rather do something that mattered that didn't make it. So the second important thing, yeah, here. Okay, speak into this, go.
Okay, cool. You actually just answered the question I was just gonna ask, which was like, how do you kind of decide what to do going forward? So I'm curious, why is this your guiding principle? Where have you found fulfillment through there? And where do you think that traces back to you personally?
Wow, that's a big question. I'm not sure I can answer that. The Constitution of the United States is so incredibly vague and is useful. I mean, the only reason it has endured is because it is flexible over time. The things that I thought mattered when I was 25 are different than the things that I thought mattered when I was 45. So I'm not sure I can give an overarching, let's see, an example. I've started a couple of companies. One is called Village Capital, which I co-founded, which is like an incubator for social entrepreneurs. And another one I started was Tonic, which is like an angel group for social investment. Me saying that is about the only thing I really get out of that, right? But I did it because I thought it was cool and I thought it would matter. I thought that if you could do crowdsourcing of due diligence, which is what Village Capital does, they allocate capital based on what the peer group says is the best company. It's like, if you can do that, you can scale due diligence to these third world countries, or sorry, I shouldn't call them third world, these developing economies where we don't have feet on the ground, right? We can't allocate capital in a great way. But like microfinance does that, and I taught this course in microfinance. Microfinance allocates capital in groups. I was like, hey, this is a really interesting thing. So I did it because if it works, it's really gonna matter. I hope that helps. Okay, so I've given you a couple of life tidbits, and you can tell from this page that I have more things to fill out. This is a little bit like Jeopardy, right? So I'd like ideas about ideas for 200, please. Okay, so what I want to talk about is how to sort and decide about things that you may want to do. Often this isn't the case for those of you who are raising your hand, say you want to start a company, but hopefully these things have other applications too. And we come to this. Okay, who knows what this is? Who knows where this is, let's say? Where is it? Do you know where in Japan? Very nice. Have you been there? Yeah? Cool? Yeah, very cool. Okay, follow-up question, which you also get to answer. This is like a cold call almost. Yeah, thanks for volunteering. Why did I put this picture up? Why does it matter in this presentation? Anybody want to take a shot at it? Yes, in the front. The path is taking you. Oh, it's a metaphor for your life and the path that you take. Wow, that is way deeper than I was thinking, but yeah. Also that. Okay, also that. Let's try one more. What are the characteristics of bamboo? Yeah. You can hear them grow. Yeah, so one of the characteristics of bamboo is it's one of the fastest growing plants that you will ever see. I am a venture capitalist. I don't make money by restructuring some deal, right? I make money when things grow. Bamboo, it's the fastest growing, it's lightweight, it's tenacious, right? It's like if you plant bamboo in your yard, it will take over your yard. And if you dig it up, it doesn't go away, it comes right back, right? This whole thing about unicorns, right? It's like, how many unicorns are there? I'm going to go join a company that's a unicorn. I hope to start a company that becomes a unicorn. It's bull. Because what unicorns do is they celebrate financing. And we'll talk about that in a second. Financing doesn't matter. What matters is whether the company is growing and is tenacious and lightweight. If I see a company advertise on the Super Bowl as a startup company, I know that it's a terrible company. Because if you have to spend that much money to get customers, you're in big trouble. Now, by the time you're big, it's different. But as Pets.com advertising on the Super Bowl, bad idea, right? So, unicorn companies equals stupid bamboo companies. That's what we're looking for. So if you're looking for a company, if you're thinking about joining a company, you got to ask yourself, is this a bamboo company? Screw whether it's a unicorn company or not. Yes, sir. What?
How do you know it's a bamboo company?
How do you know it's a bamboo company? I'll get back to that. Tell me if I answer that in about 8 minutes. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about, there's a bit of a long walk here, but it's important. I'm going to start with another question. Does anybody know what are the characteristics of an efficient market? If you've taken economics or a business class, you might have heard the notion of an efficient market. Anybody got a shot at it? Yes, here. Supply equals demand. That's very good. Are there other characteristics?
No losses?
No, there's definitely losses. Good one. There's one more thing about an efficient market. So how can supply equal demand? There's competition, and supply equals demand. What do both sides have? They have equal access to information. In an efficient market, the information is equally accessible. That's why we don't have insider trading in public markets, because that means some people have unequal information. So efficient markets have equal information, and the characteristics of an efficient market look like a bell curve. The IRR is the return, like the annual percentage rate return, IRR. And what happens is if you try to increase your return, you generate risk, which eventually brings you back to the median, right? That's the definition of an efficient market. Now, I'm not going to pick on you. So then, therefore, what is an inefficient market? Inefficient, right? Not efficient market, right?
Yeah, so this supply doesn't match demand, possibly because one side has access to information, the other
Right, right. An inefficient market, an inefficient market is a market where all sides do not have access to equal information. And you can outperform the market. You can create a long tail. And so the question is, how do you get down the long tail? And the answer is information. Because if I have information that somebody else doesn't have, then I can outperform. I have a perfect example. There's an entrepreneur that I had invested with before, and then he had gone and worked on a company. He called me like 5 years later, and he said, I need your help because I'm negotiating an exit. And I was like, oh, well, okay, sure. And so I gave him a bunch of negotiation advice for him to sell his company to another company. And a week before the deal closed, he said, you were so helpful. Would you like to put some money in this week and you'll get it back next week times 3? I was like, yeah. Why would you not do that? So I did, and I made 3x in a week because I had inside information. I earned it by knowing him for years and by, helping him out. But the reason why I outperformed on that deal was because of inside information. So inefficient markets, it's perfectly okay to trade on inside information. The venture capital business is fundamentally built on inside information and on an inefficient market. Every business you may go to, unless you maybe are in the business of trading treasury bills, any business you go to is going to be in an inefficient market. And therefore, information is the way you win. It's great. You do your homework and you can win. You can outperform. And that's the way the venture business works. And I have this beautiful quote, give me a moment to find unbiased data that supports calling you and your idea stupid. So not only is information great for making decisions, it's also great for having conversations. So if my wife is mad at me, I end up trying to talk about the data underlying the problem, right? If you are in a meeting and people are losing their heads, it's always good to come back to information. Surveys say that management teams that argue based on data are happier and outperform management teams that argue based on emotion and experience. So the last thing I have to say about information is information is really important when you're evaluating risk. I'm in the business of evaluating risk. Every decision you make has some sort of risk. And we do things, we say we take calculated risk. Because you can calculate a risk with information. The risk in this image is the cliff. It is knowable in where it is, how deep it is, how far away from it you are. But if it is not known, because let's say you're wearing a blindfold, that's uncertainty. And the goal of information is to convert uncertainty into a calculated risk. You can't calculate uncertainty, it just remains uncertain. You should always be trying to minimize uncertainty, but that's a different thing than minimizing risk. You take off the blindfold, you know where the cliff is, and then you can decide what to do. Information, super important. Okay, also when you're evaluating ideas, I'm calling this catch a wave mainly because I just like this graphic. I mean, the notion of sheep surfing waves in canoes, I mean, it doesn't get better than that, right? So catch a wave, and so what I mean by this is there's always these new things happening, right? The internet started, there's, boy, I went back quite a distance on that one. There's food delivery, right? All these things are coming, and the question is, if I'm evaluating an idea, there's all these new waves. Which are the ones that are going to matter and which are the ones that aren't going to matter? And the answer is, I have no idea. And I can't tell you what's going to have a good idea. The real question is that that's the wrong question. So let me illustrate what the right question is. So I'm talking about food delivery, right? So I think, tell me if you know this company. Raised $150 million. The investors include some notable food people like McDonald's and Kraft Foods. The CEO is actually a senior VP at a large public company, Disney, and the very first customer was Steve Jobs. All right? Does this sound familiar? You have an idea what this company is? Raise your hand if you have an idea what this company is. I won't call on you, so it's a free hand raise, right? Yeah, if you said cybermeals.com, you win. Cybermeals.com died in 1998. Not because it was a bad idea, it's because the timing was wrong. Because now you can barely swing a cat without hitting a food delivery company, right? I mean, I can barely turn on the radio without hearing somebody trying to give me a free meal in order to become a customer of their food delivery company. Why now? It's working. Why now? And the reason is because there's all these waves. We all have cell phones. The cell phones have GPS in them. right? We have a rise of 1099 workers. We have a change in culture, which means people are more interested in dining in because we have these awesome televisions that can stream video in from the internet, and they're amazing, right? And because of all that, we have a lot of waves. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can say of those, 2 of them happen to be founders. But
That's why I put them up there.
maybe more that I don't even know about. But which ones are bamboo companies? It's been 8 minutes.
None of them. Not to say they're not good companies, but none of them are bamboo companies because they're not light. And I'm not sure that the thing, I really slam food delivery companies quite hard because there's really no technology in them. They have to raise a ton of money in order to perform. They might be a great experience if I was coming out of school and wanted to understand how that works, but I wouldn't start one. Yeah.
I wonder if you explain what does light mean?
What means? Light. Lightweight. Yeah, and in a way it's a euphemism because whether you are an entrepreneur starting a company or I'm a VC investing in a company, what I mean by light means it doesn't take much capital, right? To me, a heavy company, let's take it all the way to heavy industries, right? If you're extracting minerals out of the ground, you've got to buy a big plot of land and a bunch of machinery, a bunch of diesel fuel to dig. That feels pretty heavy, right? If you're launching rockets, pretty heavy, right? If you're building a software company where you can build once and then you have 99% margins for every one you sell, light. And capital efficiency is key. We have lots of questions. This is awesome. Pick one. Go.
So like you said that for food delivery companies, there's really no technology. And I feel like a lot of them can make this far is because they catch the trend. But I feel like what VC needs to do is not only to see where the trend is, but also investing in those companies that catch that first part of the trend but can keep going and without crashing. So how do you tell which ones are the ones that can keep going?
I have 2 thoughts about that. So one is, if you look at the data, what you see is the venture capitalists who cash in on a trend started off by losing a bunch of money in that trend for a while. And they became experts in that trend, and they knew all the people and happened to be there. The industry bumps along like this, and then it goes like that, right? And you kind of have to be there in the bumping. By the time it starts going like this, and you're starting to learn the business, you're behind, right? And so that's my first answer. The second answer is, I think a great example is self-driving cars, right? So there is a wave of self-driving cars. There's a ton of companies that are providing hardware, LiDAR, software, right? All the things they're doing to try to build self-driving cars. To me, the key question is not, is the wave coming? It's when. If you are Tesla, you believe that full self-driving cars are going to be here in 5 years. If you are Toyota, you believe they will be here in 50 years. Your answer to whether it's 5 years or 50 years has everything to do with whether starting a LiDAR company today makes sense. But the good news is that's the right kind of question. I can't tell you whether this wave is one you want to start a company with, whether you can build a bamboo company here, but I can tell you the questions you have to ask to know. What are the components? If it's going to be 5 years, what are those components? Let's break it down. And if you look at, like the automotive companies all have venture arms, and they're investing in, self-driving cars, among other things. And if you look at what they're investing in all the pieces of the puzzle so that they can answer for themselves the question of, is it going to be 5 years or 50 years? So really what it comes down to is, you got to go collect the information. You got to convert uncertainty into risk so that you know. Now, I'm not sure I answered your question, but thank you for nodding as if I did. I appreciate that. Yes?
So also on the topic of trends, in like the early 2000s, there was a dot-com boom. 2010, there was a mobile boom and smartphones. I want to get your thoughts on what you think the current boom is and what you think the next big trend and timing the market.
It looks to me like it's all about data, right? If I take a step back farther, if I go back to the inefficiency page, really what technology is all about, and frankly, the US's standard of living is based on reducing inefficiency in businesses. Technology, whether it's robots or it's software or whatever, we're trying to remove inefficiency. And when I look at the data and where it can be applied in different things, there's a huge amount of inefficiency in the economy, in every single piece of the economy. So it has something to do with eliminating inefficiency using things like data or really smart algorithms. I looked at a company that I did not invest in, and I'll tell you the reason why in a second, that looked like magic. What he had was, he said, if you give me a deposition, a written transcript of an interview with somebody, typically in a legal situation, if you give me that written transcript, I will tell you which statements are lies. Magic, right? Magic. You want to talk about inefficiency? Trying to figure out the truth in a situation where you have to depose somebody? Really, really hard. This guy said, you give me a deposition, I will tell you which statements are lies. It was amazing. That is an example of a company that is doing something that nobody else is doing in an area that can definitely be made better. Now, the reason why I'm not being any narrower than that is there was a time when the reason why I didn't invest in the company, the entrepreneur. He didn't want to build a big company. He didn't want to build a bamboo company. He wanted to build a lifestyle company. And that's great for him. And he makes money with his software doing expert witness testimony. I can't invest in that. I need a company that can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So I didn't invest. The reason why I'm not being more specific than saying data and inefficiency is because there was a time, I could describe basically a huge amount of what happens. I could describe this. These are .com companies. These are internet companies. They're app companies, but still, at their core, they're using a public data infrastructure in order to provide a service. They're .com companies. We don't talk about .com companies, right? .com has been divided into a million little subsets. So I can say we're doing data and inefficiency, but the real answer is it's applied to trucking. It's applied to depositions. It's applied to every single thing. And I just think that's where we are. I don't think there's one vein to mine in that thing. There's other questions. Yes?
I'm sorry if this is a little repetitive, but
Uh-oh.
you mentioned timing, and timing is often cited as one of the most important factors for success in a startup or of an investment. How do you evaluate timing? If it's at all even possible, because some people say you can only know at hindsight.
Thank you for being the straight person for this next slide. I'm going to try to answer that with this slide. We'll see if I do. This is a funnel, right? Yeah. So in the venture business, we see every year thousands of companies. And every year, the typical venture firm invests in 3. We go from thousands to 3. One of the ways we figure out timing is we're looking at thousands of companies in order to invest in 3. It's shots on goal, right? I invested in Hotmail, and I also invested in their competitor. And we sold both of them because we happened to get the timing right. But it's possible that we got the timing wrong on one and the timing right on another, and it would have been different. So I think it's almost impossible to time markets. And therefore, you have to be in the game. You've got to be taking shots on goal. And if you think you're somewhere in the vicinity, you might get right. If you get it exactly right, maybe you make 10x. If you get it partially right, maybe it's 6x. And then it's 2x, right? So, yeah. The other thing about this slide I want to bring up is I have friends and students who say, I'm thinking about joining a startup. And I'm just like, well, tell me about it. He said, well, I looked at 3 companies, and I'm thinking of investing in this one. It's like, no, right? So my next piece of advice, it's not just for timing, it's in general, which is as you think about where you're going to head next, or as you're thinking of starting your company or an idea or whatever it is, shots on goal, right? The more attempts, it's like I have a portfolio of companies that I invest in that I hold concurrently. Entrepreneurship is really a serial portfolio. You do one, then you do another, and then you do another, and then you do another. And that's how you get a better pipeline. And just to be clear, the odds are the company is going to go under. This is a messy chart. Don't worry about reading this, but here's the important thing. If you're a seed, this is angel list data for the 2008 to 2010 set of companies. And they said it's about a 50% chance that if you raise money on angel list, that you'll raise money again. It's hard, right? So there's going to be a lot of failure. Before I talk about failure, you have had people in this series, I'm sure, and you ask them the question, what do you look for in a successful company? And they give you some version of this, right? Well, one person will say, oh, it's always the team. I invest in the team. Other people will say it has to be a large growing market, or the technology has to be unique, or competition, blah, 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 right? There's like a pat set of answers that always come up in these things, and I think it's wrong. I think instead, the key thing is there's a key thing, right? And so the reason why I find those wrong is because they don't apply to everything. So, for example, I have a company, and here's the deal. The company makes, if it's a free product, and if you become a customer of their free product, they save you $500 a year. Would you like to hear more? It's a free product, and you make customers make $500 a year. You don't want to hear more? Who wants to hear more? Yes, right, yeah. Oh, you guys are so shy. So I haven't told you who the team is. I have told you nothing except one piece of data. You don't even know what the product is. And it's interesting. And so you got to know what the key thing is. If you come to me looking for money, you should know what your key thing is. And this company came in the door, and that was not the key thing they said. It was like on page 7. I was like, no, that's the key thing. And then I immediately ask another question. What's the key problem? That's the other key thing. Now I've got this key amazing thing. This should be a tree that grows to the sun because it's a free product and it saves customers $500. Why isn't everybody using it? And the reason is because you have to give them a lot of your personal financial data. That's bad. Now I know the one good thing and the one bad thing. You got to know your thing when you're looking for an idea. I think, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes? Maybe a little more depending on the question. Sorry. No problem. Let's take this question.
Is this, okay, here we go. So we were talking about trends earlier, and I'm curious how much knowledge do VCs typically have with a particular industry, especially an emerging industry, before they feel comfortable investing? If you could speak to that, because you were talking about data.
My flippant answer is somewhere between 0 and a tiny bit. There are certainly some investors who are absolute experts in an area. My experience is the more expert an investor is, the least likely they are to invest in something that ends up making a ton of money, right? It's like my old partner in my fund, Labrador, he said, I have now lost money in so many different ways and in so many different industries, I can't invest in anything anymore. I can't find anything to believe in, right? So there is a certain, the entrepreneurial process as well as the investing process requires a little bit of ignorance. Because there are companies right now who are saying, Google is filled with a bunch of idiots. They have no idea what they're doing because we're doing it this way, and the 3 of us are better than the 150,000 or 250,000 of them. That's not just hubris, that's just ignorance. And the fact of the matter is, lots of times they're right. So, venture capitalists are not experts in the things we invest in. I am looking at a company today that I know very little about, and I just think it's super interesting. It's run by 2. See, here's another pitch. I met this company. Let's pretend we're partners for a moment. I met this company. Do you know anything about movies, the movie business? No.
From a view, just from an audience
perspective. You've seen some movies, right. Okay, so one founder is the lead animator at Pixar that did Finding Nemo, Ratatouille, Toy Story 2 or 3 or 4, one of those. And the other founder is a guy who sold his last 2 companies to Google and Facebook. Together, they are building the shell around really crappy artificial intelligence systems that can't tell whether this is a smile or a grimace, right? In order to interact between humans and systems. Because it takes both the story and the technology in order to make it work. Because right now, the technology sucks. In the future, maybe it'll be different. But right now, it takes both. I know nothing about storytelling. I know nothing about movies. I find that a compelling argument. And the team happens to fit. So I guess another side point is, if you're looking at a company, you also need to know if it fits you. That certainly fits them. We'll do another question, but I want to reveal the next Jeopardy category, view from the seat. Okay, question.
Hi, I had a question about private equity and.
I got it. Yeah.
Can you hear?
About what?
Private equity and venture capital.
Private equity?
Seems like private equity firms are kind of going into the venture capital space. Do you think it will reshape the kind of VC landscape and returns on that front?
Yeah. So in the seed and early stages of investment, it's still really, really inefficient. And in the later stages, before companies go public, right, it's become a lot more efficient because people are trying to put hundreds of millions of dollars. SoftBank raised a fund called the Vision Fund. The size of the Vision Fund is larger than the entire venture capital industry. One fund is larger than the entire venture capital industry. And so that makes things very interesting in the later stages. I think it's great because I can either sell a company through a merger and acquisition, I can have an IPO, or I can sell a company to SoftBank, right? And they'll invest in it, and it works out great for me. So yeah, private equity is coming in to those later stages. They don't come into the early stages at all. I'll say a couple more things, and then we'll just have all questions. This is the view from the seat. I did not pay for the licensing for this. The point I want to make about the view from the seat is eventually you're going to leave these seats and you're going to be in other seats in jobs and companies somewhere. The advice I always give to people that are working for me or students who ask me advice on their next job is I say, your job when you are sitting in that seat is to figure out what your boss's seat's problems are. This gets back to the sales is the most important thing. If you operate when you're in the seat and your job is to solve your boss's problems, that is the best way to succeed, whatever those problems are, right? So yes, you have to be competent at your own task, but understanding one meta level higher is actually extremely good, not just for your solution, but for becoming your boss and for having your solution work better. A separate lecture that I would give another time talks about why that is such a good thing to do in relationships, but we won't go there. I have a couple more points. These are things, if you are running a company, if you start a company and you are a company that is cash flow sufficient, then your goal is to optimize that company for success. If you are a company that is a money-losing company, your customer is money. And therefore, your job is to do what is required to raise the next round of funding. Otherwise, you don't have a company. In the same way, if I don't do what's necessary to raise another fund, I don't have a fund. And I'm no longer a VC. So it's important to remember that your view in raising a company is it goes bankrupt. Right? The number one way that companies go out of business, they run out of money. So if you are a money-losing company, your customer's money, you darn well better know what that customer wants from you when you go to them a year from now to raise capital. So it's not just I have this great idea, we save every customer $500 and we're free. You also got to know what that money wants to see. Another important venture capital view is equity investments. I make equity investments in illiquid companies minus a liquidity event like a sale or an IPO equals charity. Equity investment minus liquidity event equals charity. This gets back to, I just want to underline this as part of the point I made earlier. We celebrate fundraisings. I think the best example is WeWork. WeWork was valued at $45 billion, and they had raised, $5-10 billion. And then they tried to go public, and they weren't able to go public. They are not worth $45 billion. Right now, we have no idea. They may be worth nothing. There were people who assumed that they were paper millionaires and were shopping for houses before that IPO, and when it fell apart, it's highly likely that most of the employees are going to get nothing except for the founder who made buku bucks. So we don't celebrate until there's an exit. It's important to remember. Yes? Yeah, sure. So the question is, I think the question is really one about focus. WeWork didn't fail because of lack of focus. They failed because their business model is screwed up. They're a real estate company, and when you look at it with real estate metrics, it's not doing that well. The other question about focus is, you're absolutely right. The key job of an entrepreneur, less so a VC, but the key job of an entrepreneur is to make trade-off decisions, right? You can't do everything, and you got to decide which things are important and not important, and that's where things like information and knowing your customer is the next round of capital and things like that help inform that. I'm going to have you go until you're finished, and we'll take some more questions. All right? Great, I'm almost done. The slide I just skipped talks about the venture capital fund creation. The fact of the matter is, failure is always an option. Venture capitalists lose our money half the time. I mean, we're actually really terrible. We invest in companies that we think are going to be the next Google, and half the time we're entirely wrong, and another 45% of the time we're mostly wrong, which means we barely get our money back, which means occasionally we have a company which generates all the returns. And it's okay. It's okay. We fail all the time. I've invested in more entrepreneurs that have lost their money in the last company that they did than I have first-time entrepreneurs that have yet to lose money. Because it depends on how you lose money. It depends on how you fail. But we're all going to fail. And we might as well get used to that, because failing is really the only way we learn. And it's also important in a company to know what stage you are in, because there's a stage in a company's life when it is incredibly important that you fail as quickly and often as possible. I've invested in a company where they've spent the first, I think, 6 months doing nothing but trying things and failing. And that's the goal. The goal is they're in this messy bit where they're trying to figure out exactly what the product is. Why hire a salesperson and put $4 million into promoting a product that you're not sure is going to work right, that you're not sure that customers are going to use? Is anybody a Superhuman user? If you get a chance, go look at Superhuman has a nice blog. Superhuman is a shockingly expensive email client. And they talk a lot about the way in which they went about finding product market fit. And you have to be here. If you lock in on your product too quickly and you're over here, you're screwed. So failure is an option. And those are my points on the goal. I have one more thing to say, and then nothing but questions. I can't get through this whole presentation without talking what is, for me, the giant problem in the entrepreneur venture capital business, which is most people look like the white dude that's standing in front of the room. It hit me incredibly hard. I joined the board of a public hospital, and I sat and listened to the reports of the people that work at the hospital and the doctors and the nurses and the administrators that came through, and I said, I don't think I knew cognitively, but I didn't know in my soul just how bad the venture business is at the whole gender and racial problem. So we all have work to do. What I have learned is all I can talk about is what I'm doing. I can't talk about what you're doing. I can't even really talk about what should be done. What I'm doing is I have a fund that invests in more women than men. It turns out the women outperform the men in that portfolio. So that's an example, right? There's other stuff I do which I won't talk about. But I just can't end this conversation, this time with you, without just reminding you that we have a job to do. And it's not just do great work, make a lot of money, let's all get rich, or even let's improve the social good, let's make sure that there's financial inclusion in Indonesia. But it's also, we've got some work to do right here in this neighborhood. Questions? Yes, I'm ready.
It would really be helpful if you're able to say what you're studying or maybe your
cool.
name too.
Hi, thank you for giving the talk. My name is Haven. I'm studying data science. So I just have a question on like due diligence, because I know you talked a lot about not really understanding or needing to understand the industry that an entrepreneur is pitching you. But then what is the point of due diligence in your case? And like, what are you actually doing after you say, okay, I buy this story? What are the next steps? And could you dive a little bit deeper into that? Thank you.
I'll dive a little bit deeper, but not a lot, so we can ask lots of questions. I think there's 3 steps. The first step is what I described before, which is getting to the root of the matter. I think the one thing that venture capitalists are very good at, and when I sit in a room with a lot of other venture capitalists, getting at what the key greed factor is and the key fear factor is in a company. And then if that makes sense, then you roll it into deeper and deeper effort, right? And it's like, if those make sense, then, well, is the team any good? If that's not one of those things, and all these other pieces, and you start checking the box. That's kind of phase 2, which is now you're looking for things to make sure that you haven't missed anything, that you haven't screwed up. And then phase 3, well, actually it happens all throughout, which is ultimately, I think in the venture business, that investment is an irrational act. Usually in my conference room, there is somebody that is madly in love, right? And we invest in companies for like 7 to 10 years. Our company investments last longer than the typical marriage in the United States, right? You kind of got to love it because there are going to be bad times and you're going to have to work through it. So there's love, there's the high-level problems, and then there's checking the boxes to make sure it works. And by the time you're done with that, hopefully you have a fair sense of what the business is and what the industry is. Other questions in the back?
Hi, my name is Austin. I'm a sophomore studying Econ Business. I wanted to ask about how did you initially break into VC coming out of Boston Consulting Group, and what did your path look like initially starting out? Like, what was your initial job in VC, and how did you end up starting 2 funds?
Wow, okay, that's like 4 questions. I was contacted by an executive recruiter. So a headhunter got me into the venture business. I think the best way to get into the venture business, if somebody has interest, is basically exposure. So the problem, I showed the Brotopia book. The problem with the venture business is that it's relationship-based. So like it's easier to get in my door to talk about a company if you already know me than not. So if you want to get into the venture business, it's a lot of relationship building. The good news is if you're around here, like every day of the week, you can come talk, listen to a dude like me, or go to some mixer where there are VCs. It's like you have the opportunity to build relationship. There are lots of folks who get in the business basically by interning. You work for free, and now you have relationships. Now people think of you in that space. There was a second question. That's how I made the decision. That's how other people get in. How did I start 2 funds? I'm bored. I've been in the venture business for 20 years. The thing that keeps me here is when I think of new and interesting and fun things to do with really cool people. And that's my criteria. And if I can't find new interesting things to do or fun people, then I'm out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
go.
My name is Molly.
Hi, Molly.
I want to ask about Tonic.
Yeah.
From what I understand, Tonic is an impact investing company. And you say like you do what counts or make something matter, and you were saying like you just wanted to do something fun, and so you co-founded Tonic. But the people that work at Tonic are so passionate and tenacious about their impact work and getting other people involved. I just am curious how you truly feel about impact investing. I mean, so many people are so afraid of it.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that in 2 parts. One is what I think about it, and the other one is I didn't give the full story on why I started Tonic. Part of the reason is I was thinking about raising an impact fund, right? And as part of that, I wanted deal flow and connections. And so I started Village Capital because it was like an incubator, and I started Tonic because they were generating their own deal flow as well. So at a certain point in time, I was probably seeing more impact deals than anybody in the United States because of those 2 entities. And so it wasn't just hey, it would be, I said it was, but there was actually a meaning behind it. I decided not to start an impact fund. And the reason is because I worry about the impact industry as far as investment goes. Here's what I know. I try to make the maximum amount of capital possible, and I don't. I earn something less than that. A lot of impact investors are trying to make something less than the maximum amount possible because they also want to do good. And they're going to make less than that too. And I think that once you start losing money, it's really hard to keep doing your thing. And so the industry is very small, and it's very segregated between people who, there's this language like financial first or impact first investors. But the total amount of money is like less than 2% of what the venture business is. The venture business is like less than 2% of what the hedge fund business is. I mean, it's a tiny business, and yet we spread it all out, and people feel a little confused in its early days. I decided not to raise a venture fund about 6, 7 years ago, and I haven't yet seen things change. Now, it could, and so my fund, Transform, which is one of the questions, why did I decide to start these funds? Transform is an impact fund, but it's completely separated because I'm donating my personal profits. So if that fund hits the moon, if Google is in that portfolio and it returns 300x, then I'm going to just donate more. I don't have to make any compromises in order to do it. And so I look for things where there's no compromises in the impact. So financial inclusion is an example. I'm on the board of a financial inclusion fund. Financial inclusion makes sense because just offering basic financial services in certain countries has a huge return, both economically as well as socially. I mean, I think it's a very rich field. And so I like that. Other areas I worry about. Other questions? I'm following the microphones.
Yeah. I'm Raj.
Yes.
I'm a data science major, and you talked about how sales is like the most important thing, and you also talked about how data information can make you a lot of profits. So, like as a VC, what do you look for in people? What do you value more, sales or data?
I think the question is, what do I value in people that I'm investing in? It's a really, really hard question because it's different in every circumstance. But I think the short answer is this is going to happen as soon as you hand that microphone off. You want to go in business together?
Sure.
Do you? You do, right? All right. We're going to do this, right? How long are we going to do this for? 7 to 10 years, right? Are you in?
Let's go.
Let's go, right. I mean, I know nothing about you, and there's a bunch of other things that have to fit, but in the end, we just shook hands. We're going to do something together, right? It's like, it's an incredibly risky, I'm sorry, I have one more example. I have no idea how much time I have. I'm just going to keep talking. Last night, I sold a company last night. Actually, the entrepreneur sold the company last night, but I gave my approval last night. And it was one of the most meaningful moments to me ever. Not because I made money, well, okay, but no, it was because I have known this entrepreneur for a decade. He has poured his heart, I mean, this has been his life for 10 years. He's a single dad. And he's turned down an offer to buy the company 3 times. This is the 4th time that people have come back. And he said, I really think I'm going to take it, but I'm not sure. And we talked about it, and we've been talking about it, and we've had a relationship over a long period of time. He wanted me to make a concession in my exit, having to do with the mix of cash versus stock. I was inclined not to do it. And he said, well, he just happened to mention in passing that he had a choice to make in the negotiation. And if he had done it one way, it has to do with how he gets compensated. If I get paid from the company proceeds, but often when a company gets acquired, the acquiring company separately gives the entrepreneurs and the lead shareholders like a bunch of extra money. I don't get a share of that, right? It's kind of a way to get around the investors. The investors, right? It's like, I'll sign you up to a consult. He's going to make like $7, $8 million in consulting fees in the next couple of years or a year. And he said, it just didn't feel right to me that you wouldn't get a part of that. So I'm giving you a part of that. All because of the relationship that we built. I don't deserve it. And so I said, I will compromise on everything that you want in terms of cash versus stock. I don't owe you that. You don't owe me what you gave me, and I don't owe you what I gave you. Let's do it. It was so awesome. It was great. Okay, others?
I got.
One in the back, and then front.
Hi, my name is Advait. I'm studying CS. And I guess the question I have for you is that where do you see the edtech industry going in the future? And do you think there will be one in the future?
Ad-tech or
edtech?
Edtech?
Yeah.
Edtech is super interesting, right? So here we are in one of the most expensive methods of education ever, right? We're on expensive property in an expensive building, right? Doing expensive things. So certainly there is inefficiency, right? And so there's room. I have no idea where it's going. Is it something that's worth experimenting in? I think so. But I would not start by trying to eliminate this. Because ultimately, I think what this is, I mean, you're going to get a great education, but it's also credentialing, right? It's a weeding out process. It was hard to get in here. It's hard to get out of here. So when I'm hiring somebody from here, I'm using that credentialing as a way to know roughly what I'm getting. That's going to take a long time to really be overturned. Your diplomas are assured to have value for a long time to come. I'm more interested in ed tech in the places in the margins, in rural Mississippi where there's like one teacher for 100 students, or in other countries where just basic education around math, like Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit. But that is an example of a way to democratize education. I think there's plenty of money to be made there, but it's solving a different need. That's actually educating people. It's not necessarily getting them jobs, which is one of the things that the credentialing that this place gives you. I think it's great. Go do something in ed tech. Come talk to me. Yes.
So my name's Johnny. I do energy engineering.
Cool.
But
energy engineering?
Yeah, it's new.
Cool.
But my question is if like when I'm looking for investments, how should I best reach you?
So if I generalize it, so you're going to start a company, and when you're looking for investment, how are you going to reach a person with dollars?
Oh, I was just gonna. I really mean like, what's your contact info?
What? I'm sorry. What?
What's the best way to reach you?
Oh, me? You've got my contact information, right? It's like, I'm findable. I'm on LinkedIn, right? I mean, it's easy to find me. The problem actually is cutting, like if all of you reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you, right? It's just not gonna happen. And so I think the trick is, what do you think's gonna turn my head, right? So you're now competing with 300 people, let's say, in this room, when I'm going through my LinkedIn, that I have to respond to. And the nice thing about this question being the last question is it ties together a lot of things, right? That's a sales question. It's a sales job. You've got to know your customer, right? What do you think is going to cut through? What do you think is going to get to me? And then there's actually a whole skill. One more little story. This story is getting a bit long in the tooth, but we invested in Pandora. Pandora went public. We made a lot of money. Pandora is now owned by, I think, SiriusXM. Tim Westergren was he was very good at this particular process. He got in the door on a cold call, and I think he said something like, I was a performing musician for a bunch of years, and he just had a very interesting background. And we said no. He said, we want to go out and build a database of music. We're like, no, we're not going to fund that. And then he got back in the door again. He kept giving us updates that were interesting enough. And we said, why don't you come in and talk again? And he said, okay, I've built the database, and now I'm looking for customers. So we said no. And then he came back again, and he said, I have customers. The customers are like AOL and Barnes & Noble, two companies that don't even exist anymore, right? And we said, yes, right? But the interesting thing is, Tim should give a talk here, pretty much, to answer the question of how do you get in the door multiple times? He did 300 venture capital meetings before he got funded. And he was really good at it.